Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at some source material that, honestly, it radically challenges just about everything the modern world teaches about leadership, about power, and influence.
It really does. We're exploring the true source of authority, and it sets up this contrast between, chasing titles and visibility versus developing an internal state that our sources call alignment.
So the mission for this deep dive is to really pull out this profound and frankly surprising paradox that's right at the heart of what makes influence effective.
Exactly. And if you're a leader, a teacher, anyone who's felt that constant draining pressure to perform, to initiate, to just generate outcomes all the time, this material is going to speak directly to that exhaustion.
Right.
We're going to show that real authority isn't something you grab or you have to defend. It's something that is released. It just flows effortlessly and sustainably through this idea of alignment.
Let's start with the core problem the material points to, because I think it's something everyone feels. We confuse authority with our position on the org chart.
Yes. And we mistake impact for just being independent. We think leadership means being the one who's decisive, who takes all the initiative, who always has the answer.
But the sources say that's a trap.
It is. The core unsettling truth here is that unchecked independence, it isn't strength.
No.
It's actually a form of disalignment. And that disalignment, no matter how sincere or gifted you are, it ultimately drains your influence.
It doesn't produce it.
It doesn't produce it. The sources argue true authority flows naturally when your will, your timing, your whole posture is perfectly aligned with a higher purpose.
That immediately flips the script on everything we're taught, the lone visionary, the entrepreneur who broke all the rules. If authority comes from alignment, doesn't that sound a bit passive to a CEO who has a deadline to hit?
It sounds passive if you mistake alignment for inaction, but it's not. It's actually the most active form of leadership possible. It requires this acute sense of discernment.
Okay, so how do they prove that point?
Well, the source material anchors its whole argument in a truly radical statement. It points to the most authoritative person who ever lived, Jesus, who openly said, "The Son can do nothing by himself. He can do only what he sees his Father doing."
And that one sentence just forces you to stop and think. He wasn't operating based on his own divine power alone.
Yeah.
He was operating based on moment-by-moment observation and, obedience. And if he needed that kind of radical dependence, what does that say about our obsession with personal initiative?
It shows us the deep error of confusing authority with control. And this, for anyone trying to lead well, this is the vital distinction.
Okay, so let's unpack those two, because on the surface, they can look really similar, but they produce totally different results.
Yeah.
So how are the sources defining control?
Control is, at its heart, managerial power. It's the assumption that leadership means you initiate, you decide, you direct, and this is the key, you manage the outcomes.
And when things go wrong?
When results fail, the professional relying on control just pushes harder. They rely on raw effort. And it is exhausting because you are constantly pushing against reality itself.
And the sources really emphasize that a leader who relies on control always has to be protecting something.
Yes. You have to defend your position, defend your decisions, constantly prove you were right.
So how is authority different?
Authority is the inverse. It's not something you manufacture. It's something you carry.
Yeah.
It's a result of your obedience, your inner formation. It's less about asserting your vision and more about discerning the direction you're being guided in.
It's more about weight than position.
It's all about weight. And here's the key insight for you. True authority, the kind that flows from alignment, it does not need to be defended. It simply has that weight. It works.
That's a huge shift. That tension between protecting your position and just operating, that changes everything.
And this distinction is so urgent right now. We live in what you could call an age of visibility. Systems are flattening. Trust in institutions is, way down.
And audiences are smarter. They're more discerning.
They're hyper-discerning. And this whole environment pushes leaders toward performance, where charisma is so often and so tragically mistaken for a real calling.
That visibility is a huge hazard. It pushes people into what the sources call independent ministry, basically doing things for your cause or for God instead of doing things with that alignment.
And that independent action, no matter how zealous it seems, eventually collides with a kind of divine resistance. It's subtly rooted in self-direction. So authority just collapses when your calling is driven by your own initiative rather than intimacy with the purpose.
Okay, let's talk about the charisma trap. Because charisma is magnetic, right? It gets immediate results, it draws followers. But the sources say charisma without submission creates a really unstable illusion of authority.
It absolutely can. The sources point to the Old Testament figure Samson
Right.
as a really sobering example of this. He was empowered by God's Spirit, no question. Yet he repeatedly, willfully, just ignored God's boundaries. His physical strength, his visible gift, his charisma, it stayed with him long after his moral and spiritual obedience had completely eroded.
So he was still performing miracles.
Yes, performing miracles while operating completely outside the structure of the divine mandate.
And the danger there is that the performance confuses everyone, including the leader himself, about the true state of his soul.
Precisely. I mean, Jesus himself warned that many will point to their amazing results, their prophecies, their miracles, their visible works, and he'll say, I never knew you.
Which is just a stark illustration that visible success, even miraculous success, is no guarantee of alignment.
Not at all.
So if it's not forged on the main stage, where does true authority come from?
It's forged in the unseen places, in private obedience, in faithful service when nobody is watching or giving you credit, in disciplines of rest and solitude. The design is intentional.
How so?
Authority has to be matured in obscurity. It's a protection, really, to prevent your influence from outrunning your formation. Because if your influence expands faster than your character, you will eventually collapse the very platform you're standing on.
Okay, so let's get concrete. Let's look at the clearest historical examples the sources give us to see what happens when alignment is lost versus when it's maintained under pressure.
Right, and the principle we're testing is this.
Yeah.
Authority exists only within obedience. The moment alignment is lost, authority becomes counterfeit, even if the positional power is still there.
So where do we start?
We begin with Saul. He's the classic example of the failure of positional power. He was the first king, he had the status, but he lost his authority by substituting, well, partial obedience for full submission. God commanded him to utterly destroy the Amalekites.
And what did Saul do instead?
He spared the best livestock and the king. His plan was to use the animals for a better sacrifice later on. He was essentially trying to optimize God's instructions.
He thought he had a better idea.
He thought he had a better idea. And when the prophet Samuel confronted him, Saul defended himself. He framed his disobedience as a necessary improvement. And Samuel's response was just devastating. To obey is better than sacrifice.
By injecting his own will into it, he fractured his alignment.
He did. And the practical consequence for his leadership was immediate. His kingship became reactive, insecure, paranoid. Because his authority wasn't flowing from God anymore, he had to manage and control every threat himself.
Which led directly to that obsessive, destructive pursuit of David.
Exactly. So now you contrast that with David, who was the master of waiting. He was anointed king long before he was ever enthroned. His authority was formed not in courts and palaces, but in caves, hiding from Saul for years.
And what was the critical decision that really solidified his authority?
It was his refusal to seize the throne prematurely. He had two clear opportunities to kill Saul, the existing disaligned king. And had he acted on his own initiative, sure, he would have gotten the throne faster.
He would have gotten it through violence, through misalignment.
Correct. He chose to trust God's timing. And that demonstrates that real authority matures when obedience is maintained under extreme pressure, even when the path of self-advancement is wide open.
That patience is where the weight comes from. He didn't have to seize power because he knew his authority came from another source.
That's it, precisely. And for one last, really sobering example, we look at the case of Uzzah. The peril here wasn't evil intent, it wasn't ambition. It was noble intentions without obedience.
Right. Remind us what happened there.
The Ark of the Covenant was being transported, and the oxen stumbled. Uzzah just reacted. He reached out his hand to steady the sacred ark.
And he was struck down instantly. His intention, protecting the sacred object from falling, was arguably good.
It was.
So why such a severe, immediate judgment? This is where that idea of a divine mandate is so important. What specific pattern did he violate?
He violated the very specific, established pattern for handling the ark. Only designated priests could touch it, and it had to be carried with poles, not thrown on a cart. That specific pattern was the expression of God's authority in that moment.
So Uzzah acted outside the mandate.
He did. He believed his noble motive could replace radical obedience to the established structure. And it shows that even our best intentions can't be a substitute for obedience to God's patterns. The moment that obedience fractures, authority collapses because the source is compromised.
It's a staggering lesson in respecting the boundaries, and it brings us back to the ultimate source for all of this, what the material calls the Trinitarian pattern.
Yes. Authority, at its core, is relational. You look at the Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit. Submission within that relationship doesn't undermine equality. It expresses it.
So the Son submits to the Father.
The Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son, and the Father works through them. It's this perfect flow of authority through loving unity and alignment. And that is the blueprint for all healthy, sustainable influence.
Okay, so we've covered the principle. Authority flows from alignment. We've covered the problem. Independence and control will drain it. How do we take this, high-level principle and anchor it in the day-to-day reality of leadership?
Well, the source material gives a really practical framework for this. It's designed to anchor authority in daily obedience, not just occasional inspiration. It's a three-step rhythm: see, submit, and serve.
All right, let's start with C.
We begin with see. This step is all about cultivating discernment. It's about training yourself as a leader to recognize what God is already doing before you take some impulsive action. It's the antidote to that entrepreneurial obsession with just initiating.
So in a professional context, that could mean pausing before the big meeting or before a product launch or before you step into a conflict and asking, what's the truth here? What are the boundaries that are already in place? What's the real direction we should be going in?
Absolutely. Go back to John 5.1 time. Jesus only did what he saw the Father doing. Authority begins with attentive observation, not with impulsive action. If you're rushing, you're acting on your own will, your own timing, and that puts you right back into that exhausting control dynamic.
Okay, so after C, we move to submit. This seems like the hardest part. It's about shifting from self-reliance to surrendered trust. How does a professional submit their will when the pressure to achieve is so intense?
The primary model here is Gethsemane. Jesus knew the path forward was going to be incredibly difficult. He wrestled with his will and his timing, and he prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done."
Right.
Submission is that vital conduit of authority. It's what aligns our limited, time-bound will with an eternal, limitless one. If we try to seize a vision on our own, even a good vision, we risk that spiritual resistance we saw with Saul and Uzzah.
So submission isn't weakness. It's actually a strategic reliance on a much greater power. It's the ultimate strength.
It is. And that brings us to the final step. Serve ye. This reframes the whole idea of authority. It moves it away from control and ambition and toward faithful stewardship that's expressed through humility.
In the sources, this is often called cruciform authority. Can you unpack that term for our listener who might not be familiar with it?
Of course, cruciform simply means bearing the shape of the cross. So authority that's cruciform is authority shaped by self-denial, by sacrifice, and by humility. It means you lead by laying down your rights and your desire for position.
And the clearest example of this is the foot washing.
That's the one. Jesus, who had all authority in heaven and on earth, took on the lowest, most humiliating task of washing his disciples' feet. That's authority being demonstrated, not declared.
It's shown through sacrificial love.
Exactly. When your authority expresses itself through service, it guarantees that your influence reflects inner obedience, not just personal ambition.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening right now, trying to lead or influence today?
I think the key takeaway is that true authority is relational. It's cruciform shaped by humility and sacrifice, and it's sustained by that moment-by-moment alignment, not by your own effort or control.
Right. And the highest expression of authority, paradoxically, is radical, humble surrender.
This whole exploration is really an invitation, isn't it? To move beyond a kind of performative authority leadership built on applause and metrics into what the sources call formative obedience.
It is. The authority that actually endures flows naturally from intimacy, from faithfulness, and from submission to a defined purpose.
We have to ask ourselves that powerful question the source material poses. What if the limitation you are resisting is actually the gateway to deeper authority?
What if surrender, when it's properly understood, is not the surrender of your agency, but the very source of lasting influence?
It's a call to lead, to teach, to disciple, not through pushing and striving, but through a quiet alignment and trust. Because authority that's real is recognized by its fruit and its weight. It doesn't need to be announced or defended. So if you're seeking greater influence, look first to your alignment. What structure, what guidance will you choose to align with today?